This is in the middle of the war, of passive aggressive war. The termination of the must is a must, whether the termination of the cancers is a must, and it will be whether it is also irrevocable, and whether reason and whether reason and whether reason adjacent and whether reason. Termination will be irrevocable of the cancer synthesis. It's being a cultural level. The recent field, the recent trip, utterly startling. It started to remind all of the fuss there's been. A recent down compared to probable considered as final remarkable, and whether of the final version and whether another version of not considered along with of. We constantly criticize. Where does it even begin? And there's multiple ways to approach this. We demand so much. Check on the volume of how much pages I wrote. And it's going to take a while before this video gets on, which adds to the trouble. And I don't want to raise my voice to a higher volume here. This is about preservation of. There's no decency from the zombies cancers. Check out how much they are carrying the banners of degen. It's so simple in a way, why they're so easy. Declare it and are utterly hostile against others and yourself, and whether reason there and probably of. Simply and whether reason there and whether another, whether and also there, and whether reason there and whether also, and whether reason there and whether another, and whether reason there and whether also. Declare it's because of the Jews. Some fictional character that's half truths. These are often doing equality 50-50. That's their hit those. I really consider whether there's this vicious agenda around here, where many of the fake friends, sort of much more whether comparatively later found. And notice there, where does it even begin? We can begin from anywhere and it leads to Nazism. This is a vicious surroundment because there's so many false innocents they can relax around. Are they even Americans when Detroit is feudal non-defenders? The nation's got to combine force together right now. I don't want to notice any of this sort of this half-doing, whether an incompletion. Gotta be directly nuclear bombing them with that sort of attitude. This is our planet to save right now. It's beyond mission, beyond level difficulty. Recent instances there was multiple, the probable and whether recent probable to be considered of multiple instances of different versions. Noticing it's the specific language lanes that we're pinned against, right? Whether restricted against, whether the reason they're restricted. I wish it was more Poland and Russia, probably much more smoother. And already noticeable, I'm going about it strategically. A while, there's so much improvement. None of these could ever reinvent any of the stuff. This is a mass camouflagery. Uses a scan, whether leaks of the users at here, and whether reason there, and whether camouflagerists users around here. Of sheer cancer number that probably engineered their way to this number. Delusional, spasm, erratic, not even here. We got ghosts and Nazis around. The case of the Gorims is and reason there of it's probably considerable as case of the Gorims. So lest we investigate and whether hearing mention and whether also whether reason there and whether also and whether. That's how dysfunction the zombicist would be, whether the zombicist is or not. I have mentioned this numerous times before. I have to mention it 100 other times in order to get some activation around. There simply is no man around, and not in the governments either. And whether reason there and whether first there's no governments around and there's no man around. We simply don't have the numbers. Donald Trump is one guy, he gets attacked. Supposedly actually do a tally, and whether reason there, and whether do a tally. And check how much Usain Bolt gets mocked, gets taunted, and do all this monetarization by the sheer billions of these graduated, elected brutes, and amongst other titles of. Do I have to beg to numerous the current nuclear bomb holders, and whether group and groupers or whether group holders? And going about since it's sort of the momentous Morgan, whether momentous and whether reason there and whether reason there and another whether reason there and whether reason there and whether and the momentous Morgan and whether comparison not as much there. A considerable hearing is usually office desk. How could it be so multifunction? How could I be this super god character, whether super ultra being that's both Superman and multiple other characters combined without having even time to shapeshift? Whether calorie expenditure or some other energy form, since I used probably Tesla or some electric energies, whether and they're related to electric energy, whether reason there and whether related to and whether reason there and whether also whether reason there and whether related to electric energy. Our guys being murdered. Modernity and how could earlier Rosenthal generation simply only targeted their own guys this much? Going each aspect, we can find something, right? Notice the degens are specifically working on to the best of its number-based capacity, shamelessly using its welfare, going about with the distractions. Now it seems all the noises is for a specific reason. It's in combo, at least with, right? And whether also, and whether or not, and whether reason there is, whether and whether reason there, and combos with, whether reason there and whether, and combos, and whether reason there and whether combos with the Zuber's language specifications. For example, words have to be pronounced. That's sort of accountable as one. So instead of tickle strike, tickle strike, you gotta mention a different way, which is a move when you're startled, you're not gonna pronounce, and then you're gonna evaluate it, therefore you're wrong. Instead of check on the person's identity, it's like we no longer check who is Bromir, or whether reason, we no longer check whether it's regular person or not. There's no law. It's a mass established thief. I had done a lot of work. Someone else do it. It's absolutely ridiculous. Those are far more aggressive than our guys. There's getting converted into class clowns, or whether treated as class clowns, over appraisal. Olympics is like some kind of guinea pig game where the controllers show off their guinea pigs who are completely restrained and doubtfully they can ever fight back. Unless there comes a holy warrior so that counters their spell. In some, whether of an advanced topic, whether reason or whether of advanced thinking, whether advanced topic, in a way sort of tribute, there might be forces and there might be our spells in mixed in, and that's comparative, whether more of another topic, whether change of whether and a minor change of subject. That's considered, so it's going to equate to some given credit, and whether credits to spare getting terminated. And why should I speak in a specific current English format? There's lots of probable ways. For example, right now on the screen, there's the word precipitation. How does one, if one is boxing, how does he mention, I'm doing this, precipitate? He has to take a pause. Why can't he go precipitate or precipitation? And what's wrong with that? Is it against more? Is it going to cause weather damage? Is it going to cause pollution? You cannot do chemistry with it. You cannot still be an engineer if you pronounce Newton as, or whether you pronounce equilateral as equilateral. What's wrong with that? That's actually more smoother to how you naturally perform. Every single right of way to speak English is labeled as an accent. And this, I noticed once New York masses plugs onto the internet, and the internet all of a sudden turns into this complete garbage, and are purposely dislodging it towards us. If these want to fight these wars, I personally shoot them one by one. Our guys need to have this attitude. That's actually justice, because if the stuff is way overboard, it's not going to resolve to that way if the person has attitude. Why is this false statement, whether contaminated, and whether it's this false, whether also much to do with Nazism? It probably coincides with whether matches, whether closely, whether relates to the class clown topic, whether to the class clownery, or whether and whether class clown and whether the associated topics and whether regions and whether the region and whether desolate regions. The probable accountable has a bit of abstract mentions reason there. whether also abstract mention there of the probable of which whether the probable is also the good, and whether reason there, whether and another, and whether of which the probable is also the cause. Although they had produced tons of this modernity puppets of various degrees, not as widespread. Some of the different versions to accountable as of the earlier instances, whether relative and whether comparative, and whether earlier instances accountable as could be supplying to hearing mentions, and whether the mentions and whether the mentions of whether using their phrase, and whether also statement receiving bracket mark and whether bracket mark stuff. When the controllers control the place, it wouldn't be they control the place. It would be as if things were probably same. It will be interactively to near the ultimate level. Probably, hopefully, Jeebus, some force associated with Jeebus, or whether our force, or whether some exterior force can really, whether it can much of provide assistance to us. A lot of Romanian words are like landmines. Repeated too much, it's not going to function. Notice how much I actually dodge, right? It doesn't have to be really noticed, and whether known, whether examined of. Sometimes we are probably whether hearing after, whether hearing soon, or whether hearing mentioned, probably suitable of we are beings, then sort of knowings, and whether knowers, and whether we are sort of participants. Suppose we know it all, at a minimum it's sort of problematic, and haven't we noticed most of the knowers also have some kind of rather deep minor level, whether major level of dysfunction. The Zombasis doesn't interact them by the respect to wild creatures out there, by the reason they're wild creatures. Neither do they do to the humans. I've been treated as if I'm some outsider to this whole place, as if our guys didn't invent the whole place. What is all that about? That's actually rather fun. If these actually can make anything, and rather are still, and whether also seeds. The case in here is we got this number-based Nazism, and they drugged a lot of the previous leaders. The earlier Rosenthal generation, which resulted to the events of World War II and the production of all these technology, which considerable premature births, or the premature released. And now West is going to definitely crumble, even though West, and also all countries, no longer exist. Fiji probably exists, and liberalism, equality probably spread to there too. Liberalism is like such a cancer, whether such a viciousness, that it's not even undead, that it's sort of not even necropolis. Because necropolis, you have a dark, whether cult order. Over there, it's like a giant run by delusion, whether this trapped group of specialists that are already devoted into this, and they are going to continue to whether another, and also a sort of, in addition, whether another sort of outsmart itself. So there's like a comparative domain, whether another larger, whether another outsmart itself regions, whether section, and whether efforts, for whatever reason there's another outsmart itself sort of thing, and whether there is another outsmart itself out there, and whether reason they're complete, and at the word itself there. Due the number-based gluten bots and these being named as ordinary people, the tumor cancer has proven its worth to be quite deadly. And we do have a such case here. It's manipulative power, especially potent for various reasons. One of the reasons probably being, and here it mentions of whether reason there, and being whether because of whether of the turnouts has been pretty, and whether not so great. The probabilities were with us. As much as there's no supposed if it's predetermined, but this very usually approaching whether the examination of supposed if is on that sort of underknownness, whether and whether reason unknownness, and whether underknownness, so whether on the predeterminacy. That's a fair measure, right, reason. so much is expected to us. The tumor cancer simply digest. The number of those that are specialized into this brutalistic passive aggression and foul talk is absolutely out there. And whether reason there and whether also and whether reason there and whether reason there is and whether reason there and whether reason there and whether this mimicry is vastly out there. Any ugly is probably a Nazi, whether a ghost, reason there probably can be both and whether considerable as in whether considerable of various degrees of whether various magnitudes. Wrong examples are given to us. Samurais and knights are viciously fought against passive-aggressive democracy. Those the leeches, whether reason there, the leeches system, whether reason there, and whether reason there, and whether the Zambasis will ever appreciate one day for its welfare. One day it probably would, whether adaptation to this statement would, and whether in similar statements. Although that would come off on the advanced chapter, whether on the advanced approach, whether on advanced topic, and whether it would be regarded to as therefore they have done that and that's it. Whether that's taken, and the level isn't too great, so therefore they're fairly weak. That's but they're number based, and they're sort of mediocre. They don't have to register strong at the strategic chapter. That's sort of not even their region, or whether not even their specializations. Recent their regular tragic pronoun providence mentioned, and whether also whether recent their providence description of the group of, and whether the proper of the group of, and whether recent their proper of the suitable, whether recent their whether and the proper of the suitable. The probable of also to copy of, and whether the probable of the also suitable. So if it's a giant gridlock, right, and the level of the contamination gone to cultural, certain language specifications are, it has to be specific moods, specific greetings. That's not greeting. A lot of the greeting has been in compliance. And so far, our guys have done a fair job, whether a decent one. Reason could be considered probable from whether reason or probable could be considered for whether reason or another, whether reason or it could be considered of generalization of whether reason or generalization. Because either way, this planet could have gone to the degens very ASAP. Come on, look. We go to any page right now, there's going to be so much gossip. It seems, that's a gossip. Gossip is work. It's a spell. It could be a curse spell if it were sort of valid, whether not from Nazis. It's sort of not, and whether, and also sort of not, whether also and whether not, and whether another, and whether sort of not curse spells. Massive amount of chit-chats. Today's information age is just chit-chats and gossips. It's not so much they're just and whether they're buying time. At the functionality level, and whether per realism data in a way, whether reason there in a ways per whether reason there of realism data, those rather got this entire planet hijacked right now, and we are like Gordon Freeman, and that storyline is very direct, right? Notice, I have to speak in a specific way. I cannot go shrieking, for example. Why not? If it's fitable, sometimes if it's in a war fight, there's needs to be some sound effects, for instance, and which reason whether minor reason they're probable of which whether it's probable of considerable of as minor repronunciation of, and whether reason there, for instance, of. And by sort of perform using the same model, sort of paves and whether reinforces the way. So now next time when I myself, and whether others, and whether I myself also included, and whether also others, to come, and whether it comes to combat towards Nazism, then the conformity, whether these restraints and whether these prosecution, whether these inflictions remain there firmer. How's that when Morpheus speaks about something, few to none wants to hear, whether nearly none, and most the opposite sectors want to hear? What kind of mental sickness is that? These have computers in their possession, these have cars. These collectively couldn't even invent a car. They must have stolen it, or whether reason they first of God knows for as gifts. And who will give them? And they've been gifted and treated better more than Steve Jobs' sons. Right now, I probably would have problems at the functionality level and whether finding a lot of mates. Because at a security level, rather, our chance of survival, whether the chance of discomfortedness is not there anymore. Flowers and weeds treated both as flowers, what is that? And these are not even weeds. And before I indicate and whether mention the recent phrase, all of a sudden it becomes definite I'm mentioning about weeds from all these Nazis. Even if there are a lot of these that are completely gone mad, ancients, that figured out life is meaningless, alright, I'll nuke every single one of them. Let's test whether there's the present attitude, whether these fussy attitudes can actually outpower us, or invent new chemical weapons, and whether I'll delete those rifles, and whether also axe, whether axe and spears, or whether cannibal is borrowed from, and whether transport, and whether recent, and whether also transport them from a original formulating of, and they're considerable. In other words, of there's considerable reason there, and whether reason there ago, and whether another, whether reason there, and whether reason there another, whether and whether reason there, and whether another, and whether reason there ago, and whether reason there a original formulating similar to that of. How guys should, and whether reason are probable suitable, and whether first the probable, and whether just is the probable, and whether reason there, and whether also, and whether reason there, and whether also just, and whether the probable could be of. Our guys should have the attitude, at least sort of the more of key, and whether important, whether the central figures, aka whether also leaders, have the attitude to abolish any fouls and approach with edit any that due for trial, whether due for fixation, whether should be deemed dead, or whether deleted within the 7 continents, whether within this 5 continents. Reason there of probable of, and whether reason to probable to either to could be of. There's a lot to condemn, guys. There's crime everywhere, corruption everywhere. Our prime minister and necktie, they cannot, and whether also a lot in the sort of zones, and whether similar tribe, and whether similar street, and whether similar regions, and whether similar regions positions, of whether reason there, whether similar positions of. They cannot really speak in certain formats. So the maneuverability is probably within the academia setting. The League of the Feminazis. World War II, isn't it by some sort of this mother cult, this feminazi orchestration? They like science so much that do come back. Like those countable as also feminazis, right? Compared to the ones that are worse, not just being sort of the active, but rather the on source. Camera and whether sound fighter, that's the for previous, namely of whether previous 2 hours in calendar duration, or whether in calendar time amount of whether in calendar time, or whether of time calendar time thereof, whether reason thereof, or whether reason thereof there. And another mention, and whether reason there is accountable as another mention. Christianity, in simplicity, simple, or whether it's symbol of hopefulness, or whether it's symbol of simpleness, and also naturalis, a maxim, a beginning life and a humble life. There might be questions of how can it be sort of a mastery evil that still holds such a whether a orchestrator, whether at first, whether before a manipulator is sort of holding that symbol. As much as probable of sort of by flying logic, whether logic flew there, whether by logic flying, and whether by logic flight, and whether by flights of logic, whether by flights of logic, probably not. As once it's sort of there, it's going to be in that moment. Life is, and whether lots of beings are, and whether living beings, much of are as if on lanes, and as if there's another world, whether other worlds out there doing battlefields of different sort of games, and the results comes off as something else, and will result to another, and there might be complex steps there. But either way, almost everything can be explained with almost infinite words, as do sort of suitableness. Once redundant marks in, then that's sort of another. But or whether written in a way it could. So there also kind of was infinite probabilities of whether there are nearly infinite complexities, and whether complexity thereof. Refer to some other instance of this multiple step, and whether considerable as a slightly, and whether a minor change is subject of. The symbol represents sort of state of groupship, and whether grouphood, and sort of Carla, or whether sort of, whether reasoning, or whether doing their portion, and whether doing their role, and sticks with a certain symbol mark. Perhaps we'll transit to the final stage, whether reasonable or whether mentionable as a final stage, where the finally forcing is resolved, all mysteries understood, and the balance restored, and the days of peace begin. And while this, I want to indicate whether hearing indicates whether reason and whether reason there just, and whether reason there and whether reason there just, and whether reason there and whether some of the prophecies probably worthy considerable as whether reason is probable worthy to consider, whether worthy of, whether worthy consider of a possible similar to some cult complex book with lots of words, Exodus, Revelation, whether reason Exodus, Revelation, and etc., where the cult member ends up, and whether one of the results that sort of ended the cult, or whether it reduced its insignificance, is they try to find a fire wheel within their own daughter and killed lots of their own children, and whether killed lots of their own daughter by numerous of the group members. Could that be this? So this let Hitler down, and we have a giant problem. So this will have giant progress. Could it be a wrong? Could it be such a whether reason and whether minor instead, and whether also moderate, and whether minor rather, and whether moderate rather, and whether instead, and whether also rather? So it could be for such a case. The whether reason there, minor polish for whether reason there. To such a case of. In every way, if any hypothesis does not sort of prevail, it's because they've been outsmarted, whether they've been counted, and it becomes their fault, even though technically, whether they're not really there. It's been pitted against others and themselves. The reason whether there was also called mark, whether reason there and whether reason and whether itself. The case of lots of perhaps of whether reason there and whether reason there just, and whether reason there as well, and whether reason there perhaps of and whether reason there in the case of perhaps of lots of the extremists of the Gorams, and whether recent there they became ghosts due to years of prolonged major disappointment. And the level of this affects sort of like a person suddenly one day his entire creations, whether his entire buildings collapse, and he wanted to have something to do with that type of stuff, and it happens on repeat. So they turn on TV, then they notice it. But that matches with the unexplained, whether the underexplained, whether this explains how much and whether reason of how whether reason and whether of how sort of this adrenaline to have some sort of battle is completely vanquished from a lot of the mediocre level, and whether lots of the extremists, and whether also whether a bit of more moderate weather, and whether rather a bit of regular type, and whether the Gorims also, and whether some of the Gorims also. Ghosts that sort of all it's left is some processing unit, no longer run, no longer seen, cannot run, cannot sing. As much as cannot run and cannot sing, it still can sort of attack us, can identify, and the hijack corpse would target. Suppose we had a zombie apocalypse, the stuff would have been solved faster probably. But because these still have a retain identities and keeps operating as if they were some worthy, precious entity, whether as citizens of some countries, and whether citizens of some places, or whether sovereignties, and whether places declare, whether pose, and whether operate as if were countries still. How could there be countries where I'm down here, right? On so many levels, that's just wrong. Namely of, I'm probably the Slytherin prince, and the Slytherin prince is even there. So we don't even have the Jewish thing. It's completely not there. And we don't have the Jewish thing. In fact, the Jews are also prosecuted to the level that they cannot state, I'm being prosecuted. Does that match to many of the, does that register beautifully, whether register astoundingly, logically? A bit reserved on whether reason and whether minor remark of the problem could be considered of a bit and whether reason and whether the word beautifully a bit considerable, whether considered as whether a bit reserved to could be probable of, and whether it's probable, and whether reason, whether there and whether reason there, and whether there and whether the probable of it could be considered, whether the probable of it could be also whether the probable of also whether the probable of also to be considered of. Whether reason is probable of also to could be considered of. To probable of. To solve this problem with methods and with solutions. Not this feminazi praisal. You did it. You're great. What's the opposite of you're great? Notice that the root of language itself comes from proper female. They seem to wield it to such perfections. And now they project it. It's important to actually execute a lot of the females. A reason thereof, and whether reason there are also females. To result to deterrence is to actually have this announcement, whether the announcement for it will prosecute. Well, the absence of such is plain wrong, and the very definition of it has been twisted. So notice it's monstrous levels, right? Whether it's giant gridlock, where they no longer have to lie, they just be the most normal thing there is, and I somehow become not as normal as those are now as of 2016 AD current decimal on year, whether current year and whether also decimal on year of, and simply recite and be usual, be casual with the greetings, with the talks. None of it, all of it is casino, at least. And whether reason at least casino. Whether reason there minor repronunciation difference of whether minor, and whether also whether minor repronunciation of at least casino of whether reason there at least. And whether reason there at least, and whether reason there and also whether reason there and whether reason there and whether also at least and whether reason there at least and whether reason there and also whether reason there also whether reason there and all and whether reason there and another and whether reason there and another whether reason there and whether reason there another whether reason there and another and whether reason there and also at least casino of and whether reason there to considerable which whether to considerable and whether reason there to whether reason there to have considerable whether reason there to have the probable of the considerable of as minor repronunciation and whether and also at least and whether reason there and whether and also at least casino of. The opposite side of this, you're great is probably you're bad, and the opposite side of Putin is excellent even, and whether reason there even Putin is even, and whether reason there another whether reason there and whether Putin is excellent even, it's probably Putin has no manners, or whether Putin is something probably worse than that. So it's corresponding to whether symmetric to whether forms a symmetry, whether so that reflect whether corresponds to whether just whether be related to their recent meshing of whether to the recent their phrase meshing of. The Nazis don't even have to be right, and they're not going to be prosecuted. And these are probably doing fair deed, whether reason there and whether and also minor rather and whether also and whether rather and whether reason there and whether also and rather a bit of whether optimal degeneracy, whether optimal degeneratism. With the speed of these completed, it's nearly almost after some exterior forces controlling them or sending these. How do some entities just figure out this stuff? Notice that Usain Bolt, he didn't even have to fight World War II. He somehow just lands in those positions. Isn't he somehow more privileged? Nobody wants to sort of assassinate Usain Bolt. Assassinate Donald Trump? Not so well. What's up with that? We gotta remove a lot of the females, right? The females. Vast majority of those are from agriculture spawn. One of the reasons the European race genetic gotten so bad is because they physically unable, as long as it's labeled, whether labeled as a female, therefore something. But I might here might be creating some pretext to therefore prosecute them. There might be a small factor of that. So I'll be fair. Whether that and whether reason they're completing a derivative. And now to the reason after, whether reason there and whether reason there for whether reason there and whether reason there just and whether considerable as sort of pseudo, whether pseudo, and whether reason there as pseudo. For it could apply whether for because of whether for because of whether because of whether for it could apply to almost any matters. And whoops, I checkmated myself. Now, there might be a bit slander of that, and it will be, oh, you are operator, you won't do that, you are simply, and whether reason it was change from this text and soon once you get more power, whether get more position, whether become more prominent, therefore you, and whether you start gaining those accesses, whether more established to the whether join more groups and started or stop prosecute others and label them as females also. Oh dear. Reason there's a bubble comes well as minor remarkable. Treated regardable as a bit comedy and whether bit relaxation whether reason they're uncomparative, whether reason they're whether reason relaxation uncomparative. It's going to coincide with so much anesthetic spray. So all of a sudden this push comes out and our guys knows how to laugh along with them. You're supposed to on guard. And how do you laugh along? Maybe you cannot. Maybe they bandage you there. Maybe they bandage towards our guys. And that's countable as a vicious spell. Talking something, if it's entirely foreign to a foreign, that's rather in a way great for strategic examination because it's utterly foreign. One usually measures something that's foreign, right? In particular, probably because whether major, whether another, whether, and major factor being because they are distant from the set of this routine, this distortion. Distortion doesn't even have to come as distortion. They just come from routine. and from the person participating in something while they weren't even adults. The whole basis of modernity is wrong. We have this hijacked kids and sent them to schools. Lots of it is against family values, against communities. Who would do that? Oh, it's because all of the humans are bad. The right way to counter towards crime is actually not do this level, and it could be probably considered as advanced a way, whether also whether and suitable for whether deserves, whether could appraisal towards, since it's fairly advanced and it's also the alignment is right, and whether reason is probable and whether the alignment is right, and whether reason and there for whether reason there and the alignment is unmatched, and whether matched to, and whether right, and whether reason there, and that's the reason phrase therein. Whether reason to consider both, and whether reason is probable to consider both as minor pronunciation, and that's reason phrase thereof. But to counter evil, one simply whether to counteract the crimes, along also with Cormac as gestures sort of done right here. Whether reason there towards, and whether reason there towards intended and towards, and whether reason there towards with Cormac, and whether to also whether reason there towards, and whether also intended, whether reason there towards and was intended with Cormac. Whether reason there and whether quote marks of, or whether reason there was quote marks of, by promoting the regular beings, and whether the regular folks would, and whether reason there and whether minor rather, whether reason there to of, and whether minor instead probable of which, whether to probable to also suitable, and whether to probable to also could be of, probable to also could be of, and whether to probable to could be of. The resultant the crimes will be fought against. Instead, we have the stagnation and simply focus on how to do these chipping works. But by toying, sort of out-toying a manipulatorist group that have no shame, doesn't attain to any society, this Nazism, tumor, cancer, which became sort of second stage, whether twice of different multiple decades, whether reason there and whether reason there and whether reason adjust, and whether reason there and whether reason and whether reason there and whether reason there and whether became a abomination, whether this became a enhanced, and whether enhanced more of a, and whether became a number-based abomination of, whether reason there became a number-based abomination, and whether reason there became a number-based abomination, or whether reason there became a number-based abomination. The results of which are probably guessable there, and whether predictable there, and whether reason with this toying towards manipulatorists that are fairly established, whether reason there are much of whether also that's one, and whether reason there and whether probable of that's one now, whether reason there and also whether reason there and whether probable of, and whether reason there and whether it's probable of to that's on now. And whether continue from to recent, and whether reason there and whether doesn't contain with social rules, instead supply with lots of the, whether substituting decency, whether it combos with, and whether supply for the absence of sort of this membership, and whether by natural order these could have remotely got into those positions. Whether substitute with, whether substitute and also supplying to, whether substitute with dramatism, and doesn't have respect for things, whether being this Nazism giant hover, whether reason there being this Nazism hover, whether reason there and whether reason there just, and whether reason there and whether being this Nazism entity is, and whether also entities. That the results are predictable. That the results will be, and whether reason there and whether reason there, the results would, and whether reason there and whether the results would become the tumor cause cancer probably not, and whether reason there, the opposite is whether reason there tumor cancer is whether reason there cancer or not, and whether reason there and reason there of, and whether reason there
and whether minor rather, and whether recent there another, and whether recent there, and whether recent there another, and whether recent there, and whether recent there, and whether the opposites, and whether recent there, and whether the opposites. Well, much remain there, while lots of the return signals, or whether the feedbacks, will be completely out of using lots of the liberals' policy promised resources, whether it's via the elected English language. Wrong ways are shown to us how to fight. It's a giant gridlock, right? Whether it's monstrous, whether recent and also with a bit of minor rather, whether recent or minor reproductive, and also with a bit of minor rather. While there's attrition grind, it's got some more legitimate now, guys. The number one being, and whether the number one unit right now is sort of this number based, and whether this consumer system, whether also this economic locus de master, isn't it? Recent there prominence words on, and whether recent and descriptions of not to provide cancerous words. Considerable of whether recent and whether probable of considerable of as another note, and whether another mention of the education sort of is out there, and sort of the creators, whether the makers or whether continuous for recent there, and whether of recent there, and whether continuous for recent, and whether recent there, and whether another, and whether continuous for and whether recent there, and whether recent there, and whether continuous for recent there. Well, it's sort of a feature out there, whether a thing out there. And the owners of it, whether the creators of it, sort of did not benefit from it very much. It's sort of right, and whether current sort of became a thing out there. The of the creators corresponding it. With a thing out there, the creators correspondingly operate when they gain something from it. And then whether, and also whether reason there, and whether reason there, and whether, and whether reason there, and whether sort of considerable as whether reason and whether, and so the sort of whether it's a sort of and whether reason there, and whether it's a sort of considerable as minor repeat. And whether as minor, and whether considerable as minor repeat, and whether minor repetition, and whether reason as minor repetition, and whether minor repeat of the either of which arrangement, and whether of which order, and whether also whether which arrangement, whether the idea of arrangement is probable to both suitable, and whether reason is probable is suitable for whether it's probable to either, and whether reason there, and whether it's probable to could be of. And whether reason there as minor repetition and minor repeat thereof, and whether, and also whether ends prior to probable of, and whether reason there, and whether probable of, and whether reason there, and whether another, and whether reason there, and whether it's probable of. Sometimes the makers of something, whether creators of something, may not be the users of it. And right now, it's probably suitable to mention whether reason there, whether reason there, and the recent years, whether also, and whether reason there, and whether also the decades, and whether reason there, and whether the decades, whether reason there, and whether the recent decades, and whether reason there, and whether decades, and whether reason there, and whether the decades, and whether reason there, and whether another, and whether reason there, and whether the decades, and whether reason there, and whether another, and whether reason there, decades. The stuff, whether the built items, whether the built, and whether also whether the made, and whether and whether reason there and whether reason there and whether just and whether reason there just and whether reason there and whether the built items and whether the built stuffs somehow and whether went to the degenesis and whether degenesis and whether reason there with and rather and whether reason there and with and whether reason there and with and whether rather and whether reason there and whether and rather and whether reason there and rather somehow transferred whether reason there and whether transferred to whether merely given whether given to lots of the degenesis whether given to the degenesis reason there to of which on and whether to of on which whether reason there and whether place to of on which and whether reason there to of and whether reason to of on and whether reason there to of and whether reason there and whether to of to could be probable considered of whether reason there and whether to of probable of to could be considered of or and whether and reason generalization thereof the probable to could be whether another whether to probable to could be considered of reason thereof is probable to considerable as minor repetition and whether also or whether minor repeat and whether reason and whether another and whether reason and whether reason and whether reason and whether minor repeat of and whether reason and whether reason and whether and minor repeat of or inherent and whether also inherent and whether reason there and whether reason there and whether also and whether inherited towards the and whether inherited to via the whether reason there and whether inherited to the degenerate and whether reason there and whether reason and whether reason there and whether reason and whether inherited to and whether reason there and whether inherited to and whether reason there and whether reason there and whether reason and whether reason there and whether inherited to the degenesis whether reason there the and whether to the degenerate and whether reason there to degenerates and whether to degenesis via the publicly whether from or whether via transfer from or whether via public is and whether reason there and whether via the and whether reason there via the and whether reason there via publicism links. That's it for now, and whether that's it for and whether another and whether that's it for now for this video instance. And whether reason there and whether that's it for now for, and whether reason there and whether for the, and whether reason there and whether that's it for now for this video and whether video instance.